In the early days of my business, I was very, very controlling. And um, when I was getting toward the end of my first year in business, I was a one man shop, and I got to a point where I remember it was a weekend about this time of year. We were going to have great weather, and in the early days of starting a business, you work a ton, and I was starting to feel the burnout because when you start the business, you got to find the work, sell it. You got to do the work. You got to bill and clean up after yourself afterward. You got all these things, and so I was getting to a point where I was stretched very thin. And finally, I just broke down and I reached out to a buddy that I'd worked with before and said, "Hey, would you be willing to do some contract work for me?" And even then, like, I was incredibly hesitant to do that, not because I didn't want to give up the margin on the work, but even though I knew that he was frankly far more capable than I was at doing the work, if I wasn't the one doing it, I didn't know how it actually got built. And I don't know, I had this issue giving up that control to someone else. And he knocked it out of the park. The client was thrilled and it was great. And then fast forward another year, hired my first employee, hired a few more after that. And I think that if you were to go back and talk to my first 4 or 5 team members, I think that they would have told you that their first 6 to 12 months was just infuriating because I had hired them to do a job and I wasn't letting them do the job because I really wanted the control over it. It wasn't just, hey, the work needs to get done. Like it needed to be my way. And I, there are a number of things in my life that I can close my eyes and put myself back in this space. We were in our second office building. We're probably 3, 4 years into the business, and standing in my office with the door closed, I had this realization. All right, Scott, if you will hand these things off and if they can actually do these things 70% as well as you can, that creates a tremendous amount of leverage for you to go and do the things that are going to grow the business further. And over time, what I realized was more often than not, they weren't doing it 70% better. They were doing it close to 100% and in some cases better than I would have. How they got there might have been a little bit different, but I had to give people that freedom, and that was a huge unlock for me. Fast forward, so from there I kind of moved into the delegation, and got a lot better at handing those things off and getting comfortable with, if we're going to grow, I have to let these people do things. And you also have to recognize that sometimes things aren't going to go exactly like you want them to. And you've got to be mentally ready to give grace when those things happen. And, if it was an issue that impacted a customer, we got to own that. And we got to make it right. Um, and then going kind of further on that journey as the team got bigger and bigger and bigger, if I'm being really just brutally honest and self-reflection, I think that I got to a point where I had kind of abdicated, and it was no longer, certainly wasn't control, and it certainly wasn't even delegation. It was, I'm just kind of, I hate to say it, but to a certain extent checked out, at least in certain aspects. And that realization hit me probably, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years ago. And so I've started getting more involved and being cautious not to go back to control, but trying to make sure that I'm really clear on what it is we're trying to accomplish. Here's the expectations, here's the metrics, and getting more back into that delegation. I heard somebody say this a year or two ago, and it hit me. They were talking about balance, and balance. You could apply that to this continuum I just talked about. You could apply it to work-life balance. You could apply it to a lot of different things. And what they said that just hit me hard was, balance is not a state that you permanently achieve. Balance is something that you are constantly doing. When you walk down the hall, every step you take, every step you're balancing and rebalancing. And so balance is not a permanent state. It is something that you're constantly having to manage. And that continuum of control, delegation, abdication is one that I'm learning to rebalance.
It's so true. I was laughing when you start talking about in the beginning in control. My first person that I hired 6 months into when I started my OG business, the wealth management wealth coaching company. Um, Number one, I could barely like pay rent, but I'd realized that I was like, you know what, like if I don't hire someone in here who's actually just, it wasn't even like I think is better, I just know is better at like time management, organization, all the things that quite frankly, when you think about from the moment like you're born, you start going to like 4K, right? Like that those people are rewarded so richly because they get A's, A pluses, right? They get honors, they get, 4.0s, they go to like they're just really well established. And I, on the other hand, was on the other end spectrum, graduated with a solid 2.9 GPA, just, didn't really kind of want to be quite average. But so I ended up actually hiring my sister, and who, in a lot of ways, we've been collaborating for, well, like forever, like since she's older than me. And um, and even at that point, even though I knew that, I would literally tell her, be like, I'd be like, can you fax this again? This is so funny to talk about faxing, but like, in the beginning, it was like faxing, 23 years ago. And I'd be like, let me see the header. And I would be like spell check, like the header for a fax. And it's just so funny to me now. That's why I'm laughing, because it's it's this idea of what is valuable. And I'm really curious, why is it that you find that founders, entrepreneurs, and just people in general find it so hard to give up control, and that, or why is it that they feel that the value is in actually the control?
I'll answer that, but I want to interject a quick story. You talked about your 2.9 Rockstar GPA. This was, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. Had a meeting in downtown Dallas. We're in the Dallas Fort Worth area. Had a meeting with a client in downtown, and in the parking lot there was this beautiful cherry red Ferrari, and I've always loved Ferraris, and the license plate said 2.0 GPA, and I thought to myself, if that is not the picture of it's not what you know, it's who you know, um, like that should be on the dictionary next to that phrase. So uh, grades are academics are important. Learning is important, but you can do a lot whether or not you had a 4.0 GPA or not. But to your question about why do entrepreneurs find it hard to give up that control,
Yeah. Or not only that, but like, why do they think that the value is in the control?
I think that when you are when you start something and when it's your baby, and if you've got all your eggs in that basket, your family depends on it, your livelihood depends on it, and you're going to do everything that you possibly can to protect what you've got invested in that. And it 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 takes a realization that you can't do it all on your own to break free of that. And I know for me, I didn't have a ton of money starting this thing. Like I said, all of my eggs were in this basket, and I felt like I had to protect that in order to ensure the livelihood for my family and for the ongoing good of the company. And that only gets you so far.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, it really does. I had one of my mentors, Dan Sullivan. He had said, he goes, "What's more powerful, being a controller or in charge?" And again, it was interesting conversation. I gotta say, 95% of the room was like in the control camp. Like, when you're control, that's like the most powerful position. And he goes, "No, no." And the other 5% didn't answer because they were like, "I don't. I feel like this is a trick question." And he said, he goes, "You know what? When you're in charge." He goes, that's like the greatest position of power, because the reality is that means that other people are in control of the things that you are doing. But at the end of the day, the final direction, decision making when you're in charge is you. And to your point, this Ferrari 2.0, I mean, I look at that like I have built companies of Ferraris, of people. I mean, Beth is an absolute. What's the best car in the world? whatever that car is, that's what she is. Not that she's a car, but like, I mean, but like this organization, time management, and just like making things like real. I mean, it's when I think about this idea is that everyone wants to move to this place where they are completely outside their company. And I've actually personally had this experience of that where it's like the pendulum you talked about, it's like it swings so far the other way that all of a sudden you lose touch and you actually come back. And Jenna's my business partner and life partner and wife. Um, that we had sort of taken our eye off the ball just because things had just been boom. We built all these incredible system structures that we realized that um, like what gets measured it gets managed, and we were not measuring anything, and that's an abdication. And why do you feel that there's this move so much towards that, like, have a company that basically is like, it's almost like passive income? I mean, it's almost lauded from like a social media standpoint.
I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, if you're in a position to be an investor, I mean, I own stock in Apple and Tesla and all these other companies, right? I'm not I'm not I'm not involved in them. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with being an investor in a company, and I also think that there is tremendous value creation, not so much in wealth, but in being a part of creating companies, funding companies, however you want to look at that, that provide a benefit and value to society, but also provide a benefit and value to the people that work there. And so I don't think that there's anything wrong with being that passive investor and having that passive income. And if you've got the resources to be able to go and put capital in, and maybe you got a little bit of elbow grease to help them do better, that is a very, very good thing. Um, I am not, I'm not in that position where I have the kind of capital to simply be a passive investor in a company like this. Maybe someday. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Um, Going back to kind of this whole abdication, delegation thing, I had lunch with a friend a couple months ago, and we had just hired on a new sales leader for the organization. And the friend I was talking to, he said, how are things going with your new sales leader? I was like, they're pretty good. There's a learning curve. He's getting up to speed on things. And what I will say is this person is very different than any other hire that we've made. And there's been some challenges with that, and we're all kind of learning together and figuring that out. And he said to me, Scott, your sales director is a wartime sales director. And with where you are at right now in your business, you, Scott, need to be a wartime CEO. And man, that just, it hit me. It rocked me. And I'm like, wow, you're right. And I'd had this kind of realization that in a lot of things I'd probably abdicated. And that was a real centering punch in the gut that I needed to say, okay, it's time for me to really step back in and get a lot more involved and get a lot more engaged. And I'm very thankful to have people in my life that will say the hard things that I don't want to hear, but that I need to hear. And we all need people like that in our life.
Yeah. Say a little bit more. What does that mean to be a wartime?
I think that the biggest thing, I'm big on consensus. I want everybody in the room to have a voice and to feel like they've been heard and really evaluate their input. And I think that you can take that too far. And at times I definitely have taken that too far, to the point that decisions don't get made and we just kick the can. And for me, what that has meant, and in the last month or two, I've had to have multiple conversations with people in the organization where they've come to me with, hey, I'm really frustrated. I'm getting bogged down with this, and really would appreciate if we could kind of retool and revamp some of the process and the interaction across departments. And I had to say, look, we're in a time and a place in our business where there's not one decision that I can make that is going to make everybody happy. And unfortunately, this is one of those times where if I give you what you're asking for, it's going to create problems for this other department. And I recognize that saying no to you creates problems for you and your department. But the reality is with what we have to accomplish in a very short amount of time, I have to say yes to them right now. Now, your your problem that you brought up is 100% valid, and it is not a state that I want you and your team to be in long term. But we're going to have to gut this out for a little while to get over this next hill. And I'm a people pleaser by nature. I'm an Enneagram 9, and I don't do well with conflict, and that's a whole other topic we can get into. And I've got scars and stories and self-inflicted wounds that have come from not wanting to have those hard conversations. But I'm getting a lot better at that and making a decision, even if I know that not everybody is going to be happy with it.
I want to come back to the conflict avoidance, but one of the things you said like earlier is this idea when you started off. And I'm always curious because there are people, I mean, there are people who've listened to this podcast that because of like our guests like you are going, man, hey, you know what? I've maybe been hanging on to control in the form of like that getting a guaranteed check, which is sort of an illusion, just as an aside. And they've gone out and they said, you know, I have an idea, and I'm thinking about like kicking the can on, not kicking the can on this, but like, you know, like kicking the tires on this and taking what others consider risk. I just see them as like, you know, validation, right? Moving towards self realization. What would you tell someone though, when you think about this continuum of control, delegation, abdication? Like if you were to see the Scott of yesterday, having a conversation with Scott of today, how would you actually tell someone, be like, hey, if you're starting off, hey, if you're beginning, or if this resonates with you, what are the top 3 things that you think those people could be doing today that would instantly change their trajectory?
I've had this entrepreneurial spirit my whole life. And in college, I remember, again, a lot of these moments in my life where I can close my eyes and put myself back in that space. I was in upper level marketing class, and this lady came in and talked about what it was like to run her own business. And in an instant, I just knew someday I'm going to run an organization, whether it's one that I start or one that I grow my way through and take one of the leadership roles. And over the years, I thought about a whole bunch of different things. And the company that I was at prior to starting Venn, I had flown to LA 26 times in 2013 on top of a whole bunch of other places. And I get done with a horrible meeting with a horrible client on a horrible project. And when everybody had filtered out of this conference room, I'm standing there. I'm the last person, and I just needed a minute just to recompose myself. And it hit me. You're good at what you do. You love what you do. And you can find a way to feed your family doing this on your own and doing it your way. And I came home from that trip and I told my very risk averse wife that I wanted to go start my own firm. And she said, "You want to do what? You're making great money. You've got great benefits. You've been promoted 4 times in 3 years. You love the people you work with. Like, why do you want to do this?" And I'm like, "Babe, I've just always had this desire." And so from there, I went on a year and a half long journey of meeting with anybody and everyone that had any kind of relevant experience in starting a business or was entrepreneurial in some way. And man, I got so much good advice. And so the jumping off point for the story, you know, you talked about that illusion of security and having that, you know, paycheck every 2 weeks. One of the people I talked to, Don Westerberg, friend, mentor, wonderful, wonderful human being. She had started her own marketing agency after a long career in corporate marketing. And she said, "You know, Scott, I always had this illusion that I had safety in having a W-2 job. And before I went off on my own, I had this realization that I don't know what goes on behind closed doors in the quarterly board meeting. And quarter to quarter, something could change and I may not actually have a job. And so when she said that, that was like, oh, wow. Am I actually taking more risk by going off on my own than I am staying in a company with this quote unquote steady paycheck? And there was a ton of wisdom in that statement. Now, that being said, I don't believe that everyone with a great idea is meant to be an entrepreneur. And yeah, and I don't say that to discourage people from entrepreneurship, but some people some people have great ideas, but they can't really put it all together. And we're all gifted in different ways. And so it is not right for everyone, but it was right for me.
Yeah. I liken it to that people who have really good ideas probably need to find an entrepreneur so that they can be the intrapreneur. Um, because they have a lot of really good ideas, but the entrepreneur is willing to take the risk or pull that final trigger, right? So often people have a good idea, but they actually make the critical mistake of actually not actually making a critical mistake. And so I agree, but I love that. I love that story of you just being willing to go out um and this is how even in the face of when people go, like, I'm guessing there's more conversation than your wife going, you're going to do what? um my wife is I would consider entrepreneurial spirited, but her, like, in her and I in comparison, like, I would say she's more risk adverse than I am, and we have conversations. So, and the fact is, you still proceeded. I think that's a good leading indicator.
Yeah. My wife has been incredibly, incredibly supportive. And another one of these close my eyes moments after a year and a half of going out and talking to all these people, we got our kids put down to bed, and our youngest at the time was probably only like 3 months old. And she said, "Hey, I want to talk." I was like, "Oh, okay. What's coming?" And she says, "All right, I've been praying about this, and I don't want to hold you back. If you really feel that the Lord is calling you to this, um, I support you, and I want you to do this. But um, we need to draw a line in the sand right now, and whether it's some amount of time or some amount of money that we're willing to go through, I need you to commit to me that if we get to that point and the business hasn't made it, that you will go get a quote unquote real job." And I always laugh in air quotes on real job. And we had just some friends of ours that were in our small group from church. They had just gone through a miserable failure of a business, and very different type of business. And I was walking alongside and kind of coaching on some things, and they made a lot of decisions that I wouldn't have made and advised against. But we're getting a front row seat to this with some very, very close friends. And so I said, "Babe, I think that this is wise." And I distinctly remember I did not want to put dollars to this. And I said, I think that a year is probably too soon, but I think that we'll know within 18 months if this has legs and we can make this work. And in January of this year, we celebrated our 10th anniversary. And yeah, and we at the beginning of the year, we do a big internal kickoff. We also have a quarterly summit that we do. And my team, there were parts of the deck that they didn't let me see beforehand, and they'd cut together this video of team members talking about their time here and their experience there. And it was, I'm my eyes are welling up. And then at the end of the video, they recorded my parents, and then they recorded my wife. And when my wife came on the camera, I just lost it. Like, people are handing me tissues, and I just think about how incredibly supportive that she has been. And going back to, you said, hey, like, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would tell somebody? Um, Number one, if you're married, you got to have a supportive spouse. And if they're not fully behind it, like, you're setting yourself up for failure. And so you're going to have to figure out how to navigate that with your spouse. And I run a podcast as well, and this is a topic that comes up over and over and over again with the entrepreneurs that I've interviewed. And without fail, everyone who has made it any meaningful amount of time has a supportive spouse. The next thing that I would say is you have to have mentors, and mentorship is something I'm very, very passionate about. Mentorship can be formal or it can be informal. And I've got a formal mentor. I've been a part of an organization called Convene. It's similar to Vistage, but it's for Christian business owners and business leaders. And even before I actually got into a group, I was doing coaching with the chair of my group, and having that external person to be able to speak into things and help me see my own blind spots. And hey, Scott, you really need to take care of this. Like, you're about to steer off a cliff. That's critical. But also, mentorship, it can be very informal. And in the ecosystem that we do a lot of work in, I have been blessed beyond belief to develop great, deep, meaningful relationships with people who are further along in their careers, further along in running their businesses, that have been so unselfish with their time and have just spoken so much truth and given me so much guidance and wisdom. And so you have to have mentors. You have to have people. My buddy that I talked about earlier, that at lunch was willing to tell me what I didn't want to hear, but needed to hear. So make sure that you don't have an echo chamber. Get diversity of thought speaking into your business from the outside. Find people in your industry, find people in unrelated industries, because sometimes when you're just talking to people that are in your space, the viewpoint can be myopic. And in my Convene group, we've got lawyers, we've got marketing agencies, we've got a couple of other tech companies that do totally different stuff. We've got a property management firm. We've got somebody that does highway maintenance. And so this diversity of thought and bringing in ideas from other industries has been invaluable.
Yeah. And I would just add on to there. I don't even think it's necessarily diversity of thought. I think it's diversity of heart. It's the diversity of the beingness of the human that's actually being in there, right? That recipe card that follows them in, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit. I want to dive into a little bit in a little bit about like your kind of how you became a nine, and but it was kind of crazy as I'm listening to you talk about it. Like, you had this idea, and even in the face, I'm guessing other people being like, "Dude, what are you doing? Like, you're leaving this." So, like, your accolades are recognition on the Inc. 5000 list, the Aggie 100. Again, Texas A&M, kind of not a tiny, not a kind of tiny little college, kind of a huge college for, especially for business. Voted as the best place to work. I mean, I know every entrepreneur. I don't care in terms of like whether you have like tens of millions, millions of revenue, or even hundreds of millions of revenue. We've all gone through it, go through it, maybe have these consistent different levels of this idea of imposter syndrome. Can you talk a little bit about that, right? Because you're close enough to the beginning of your journey where you probably still, and you've had all of this success. And can you kind of share that feeling that you've had? Because we've all had it. We've all had it. And those who say they haven't aren't really being truthful.
Man, yeah, imposter syndrome is something that I think I will always struggle with. And man, there's so many layers to that. Number one, I think it comes down to comparison. I think that is probably the root of that. And I don't know who originally came up with the phrase, but comparison is the thief of joy. And I remember in college, a friend of mine speaking those words, and I was like, oh, wow, that is so, so right. And even long before I started my business, I dealt with comparison issues, and went to school at Texas A&M, and I in high school, like I was not involved in anything. I thought that being involved in student government and this kind of stuff, I thought it was stupid. And when I got to A&M, something totally changed for me. The culture at A&M, um, there are so many things to get involved in on the campus, and whether it's fraternities, sororities, whether it's the skydiving team, the ski club, there is an organization for everything anybody could possibly be interested in. And one of the other great things about A&M is that they have an incredible framework where if you don't see an organization that, scratches the itch for you, they've got incredible infrastructure and support, and they encourage people to go start their own organizations. And so I got involved in all kinds of things. And going back to the comparison, the imposter syndrome, I was in the business school. By the grace of God, got in. There's no way I could get into A&M today, let alone the business school. And I was surrounded by people that have been highly, highly successful. And I'll be honest, like, I think a lot of people would look at my life and go, "Oh man, Scott, you've been, crazy successful. You've run this business for 10 years." And at the same time, a year and a half ago, flipping through the TV one Sunday evening, 60 Minutes comes on, and two of my fraternity brothers in college are being interviewed on 60 Minutes. And I'm going, what? And so that comparison, creeps in, and it's like, wow, they've achieved this. I'm never gonna be on 60 Minutes. So I think that imposter syndrome really comes down to this comparison where I've taken comfort over the years. A buddy of mine that started his business probably a year or two before me, and on like the first or second anniversary of him launching his company, he had written this blog post about lessons learned, and there were several really good nuggets in there. But one of the things he said was, nobody really knows what they're doing. They're figuring it out as they go. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And so we have examples to look at. We have things, but man, every day is a new day. Every customer that we talk to, yeah, there's similarities in the work that we do for customer A and customer B and customer C, but there's nuance and different stuff, and there's new challenges that we run into. And so experience counts, experience helps, but I don't think that, I think that there are very, very few people out there that like truly, truly know exactly what they're doing. And, Jamie Dimon is probably the only exception I can think of, leading JP Morgan Chase, like built an incredible company, but I don't think that there are very many people that truly, truly know every day what they're doing. And honestly, it's kind of fun. You gotta figure things out. New challenges come your way all the time. And I was talking to a friend and mentor a while back who, was part of building up a company, and they had an exit a few years ago, and he's now doing coaching and working with other entrepreneurs. And he said, Scott, I had this realization that when I was running this organization, I'm playing chess while dribbling a basketball, and there are all kinds of things whizzing at me, left and right. And I'm trying to keep the pieces on the chessboard moving while these other things are going on. And he said, I love what I'm doing now because I just get to watch and I don't have to dodge the bullets left and right. And so I thought there was a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah. I love that you talk about this, like everything is made up. That basically that like no one knows like what they're doing, and I take that Dan Sullivan wrote a book called The Geometry of Not Being Bothered, and in there he actually says rule number 1, he goes, everything is made up. Like everything is made up, and he even brings it back down to like the Bible. He says in Genesis, what does God ask Adam to do? He goes, go out and what? Name everything. Name everything. He goes, so everything is made up. It's even in like the Great Book, right? And then he says, second is he goes, nobody's in charge. And he goes, obviously there are rules that like if you want to, stay free, like follow. But he goes, basically nobody's in charge. And three, he goes, life isn't fair. And it's such a simple, and the more I am going around this earth every year, the more I realize is that the real unlock is not the complexity, but the simplicity of like, just like you listen to your friend that blog. But I'm really intrigued when you talked about like people knowing what they are actually doing. And I agree, but I'm going to take a little different take. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, Scott. I think that I think of people like JP or Jamie Dimon, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, uh, you know, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, right? I mean, Jeff Bezos. I'm just going like the big names that we can think of like as of today. I'm curious, do you think it's because they know that they're in essence in control of it, or they just have like a gyroscope that they have accepted the simplicity of that everything is like made up, nobody's in charge, and life isn't fair, and they just have accepted it on such a level that they have a gyroscope that as things come at them, it appears that they are like they know everything, right? But it's just that their assimilation from this is uncertainty and turning it into a certainty that they want. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with what you just described. I've read multiple biographies on Musk, and I'm a huge Apple fanboy. There was a time in my life where
Blue bubbles, let's go.
oh, don't get me started on green bubbles. But there was a time in my life where, man, I would have camped out for days in front of an Apple store before the next iPhone launch if I, didn't have other responsibilities. And so have dug deep into reading a lot about Jobs. And man, those guys and Musk in particular, like they're just built different. And reading Musk's biographies, what he has accomplished is absolutely amazing. And one of the biggest takeaways I had from reading his biographies was do not bet against Elon Musk. He may be down today, but give it a month, give it 2 months, and he will be back up. And at the same time, like I couldn't work for one of Musk's companies. And I think that maybe the real separation there is that they have such dedication to their craft that they don't let anything get in their way. And they're going to find a way. Now they're going to hurt people along the way. They're going to it's not going to be a pleasurable experience, but they are so committed to their craft that they are going to find a way. And when I set out to create my company, I was given a talk at a conference, I don't know, 3-4 years in, and talking about our projection and our ethos, and here's how we operate. And afterward, somebody in the audience came up to me who has since become a good friend and mentor. He said, Scott, your story reminds me of the story of our founder. And he said, Chip was the name of their founder. He said, Chip used to always say, I want to create the kind of company that I want to work for. And when he said that, it was the perfect articulation of all these things that I had rolling around in my head, but it was said so well. And so I have stolen that shamelessly. Credit to Chip Cargis of Cargis Systems. And, I think that ultimately it comes down to what is it that you want to create? And, there's what we do and then there's why we do it. And growing up as a kid, my parents always talked to us, drilled into our heads the idea of the golden rule. You treat other people the way you want to be treated. And if I'm being honest, I'm not batting 1,000, but I'm batting probably high 8s, low 9s, because I really, in how I live my personal life and how I run my business and how we engage with our team and how we engage with our partners and our customers, I'm always asking myself, like, how would I want to be treated if the situation were reversed? And I don't think that Musk and Jobs and some of these others have that kind of mentality. It is like all in, this is where we're going, get out of the way or we're going to run you over. And I don't know if there's anything wrong with that, but it's not the kind of world that I want to live in. And I want to create a healthy atmosphere where people can grow in their careers, can do work that stimulates them and provide value for the end customer.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think the more that I've been in this entrepreneurial game the last 23, 24 years is that the more I realize that so often we hold out there that success is like going from one, like, from where you were to nothing to your first million, right? And then to your second million, and then so on, right? Rinse and repeat, and you just keep going, you keep going. And I think that there is, I think that like people like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk in like specificity, right? Of like that intense focus, is I don't think they're doing it for the money. I think they were doing it for like these outcomes and like impact. Do you think like Elon, like batteries? I mean, so much of the technology we have battery wise is because of that like intense focus. Now, granted, I mean, it's turned into, but he's solving like these problems for humanity that are just like exponential. I mean, the iPhone is probably one of the single greatest technological inventions that has had incredible tailwind and also incredible headwind when you think about the human beingness of like us being with each other. It's interesting. It's opened it up, it's closed it down, which is a whole nother conversation. But you know, I think about the success that and what winning is that it's kind of what you just talked about. Like, what was the company that you would want to like work for? What is the success that you would be proud of? I think those are like such simple but so important questions that most people don't ask themselves. It's like, hey, I want to like be here. I mean, early in my career, I fell into like these ideas like, oh, I need to be like that person. I need to be like that person. And I realized that that person has a recipe card that's made up of their frame of reference, right? Their lived experiences and their focuses and beliefs. And that the more I've actually excluded and excavated the need for external sort of like I want to go where they are, and more into asking like that question you asked and asking that following question, what does success look like? The more that my universe is like, the smaller my focal point, the larger my universe has become. I'm curious, as you think back like through your experiences, and you talk about like, in childhood your parents saying this, how has belief and focus and identity shaped? And how do you feel like as you go in? I mean, you have a front row seat to so many different companies. They're like, hey, Scott, come on in, help us create more millions, right? Which is awesome, right? But you have a front row seat to kind of seeing all those different things. How have those shaped you? And how, if you were talking to someone today, how would you like want to like those different sort of like key cornerstones to be positioned for other people?
Yeah. Um, you referenced Dan Sullivan, and a couple months ago, I read 10x is easier than 2x, and then I've started The Gap in the Game. And honestly, I don't know that I actually need to finish The Gap in the Game because I think that the main idea is very, very clear. And he talks about this idea of chasing the horizon. Like, you will never reach the horizon. The horizon is always moving. And while you certainly can't rest on your laurels and the accolades, um, like, recognize that where you are today, even if it's been difficult, even if it's not quite where you want to be, like, you've learned, you have accomplished. And so I think that part of success is being not complacent, but being okay with where you're at. And it's okay to want more. I mean, he talks about, wanting what you want and that sort of thing. But um, I think that it is easy to get caught in this hamster wheel. In fact, um, a couple things you said earlier. Um, my very first job out of college, I was a one-man marketing department for an aviation services company. and I was making $38,000 a year. And granted, 38 wasn't money. It wasn't a ton of money, but I had this major hang up of I'm making less than 40 grand. And that $2,000, like it wouldn't make a meaningful impact on my life. But like I was hung up on this fact that like I didn't even make 40 grand. And, I just want to get over that hump, and ended up leaving that company and went to the next company and made, I don't know, 50, 55, and then 65. And then, numbers started going up. And each time the numbers went up, like it was, I got to get to that next rung, and I got to get to that next rung, and I got to get to that next rung. And don't get me wrong, money is important. Money enables us to do a lot of things. But if you're always just chasing that next rung, like you're not going to be happy. And so, um, money's not bad. Money is not evil. The love of money is, and it's really the heart condition around it. So there's that. But you talked a minute ago about identity, and man, so maybe this ties into that imposter syndrome. Maybe it ties into comparison. But if I'm being really honest, identity is something that I have really, really struggled with. And in the early days of my business, I'd go to these conferences, and partners that we do a lot of work with, I'd get pulled aside and they'd say, "Hey, we love what you're doing. Would you want to roll into our organization and really blow that up over here?" And to be honest with you, man, I was offended for the longest time. And in reality, I think it was a compliment, but I was offended. And when I really unpacked why I had that visceral reaction to that, I realized I have put my identity in Scott, the business owner. And if I am not the guy, if I am not Scott, the business owner, what am I? And over the last few years, like I've done a good job of reorienting my identity. And the reality is I'm a lot of things. I wear a lot of hats. I play a lot of roles. Most important, I'm a beloved child of God. And whether I'm Scott, the business owner, whether I'm the janitor sweeping the floors, like the most important thing is I'm a beloved child of God.
I think that's so impactful, of just the simplicity of you narrowing it down to like the genesis, right? Of where you come from. Um, and I think that is something that especially as entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneurism, I want to say in the last 10 years, has become a very fad thing. Like that's like you see it on social media. Oh, you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to be an entrepreneur. And I think that, especially in the entrepreneur world, I think that there's a level of your value is tied up into what it is that you receive applause for. And I remember after my son died, coming back, and this is a sign of like an incredible team took over. Like Jenna and I, honestly, we just disappeared for a while, as we were just, in our own sort of cocoon and loving up on each other. And I came back, and like they basically reduced down like my client load by like 90%, which is incredible, right? I mean, it attributes to like the culture, the team, the process, system, structures, all the things that we've been building up until then. But I just think we remember, Scott, having this like, oh, it was amazing. And then there was like this, I mean, it's very biblical in terms of this walk in the wilderness and I think that's maybe what the parable of that is that of going, if not this, then what? And I remember the first time, my first strategic coach workshop, they have this idea of like there's freedom from and freedom to. And so often everyone knows, like, hey, if I could just get rid of this, right? The freedom from side, rich, super rich. But I remember being like really oddly sort of scared of the freedom too, because when I kind of like put my ear out to that, it was like all you could hear was like wind. You know? Like you're looking over the abyss and you're going, and I think that's a real thing that we all can get. And by the way, it doesn't just happen in entrepreneurs, right? You have parents who are stay-at-homes, whether they're moms or dads, right? And all of a sudden it's like the applause they've received is in terms of like their kids and like their accolades, and your kids are so well behaved, right? And then the kids go off, and then what? Right? I mean, so it's not just in entrepreneurs, but we have these identities that we cling to. And I'm curious, why do you feel that we find value in these like titles, these applauses?
Man, I think there's a lot of different ways to think about that. Titles contextualize things. And when you meet someone new, being able to put a tidy label on something, it conveys your role in the world. And so I think that's part of it. And we also, like, living in the West, we live in a very materialistic society. And whether I think very few people are truly okay having a lower station in life. And I think that it's part of the human condition. That's part of sin nature to want to be greater. And, you know, going back to the Bible, Satan was an angel, right? And he wanted to be God. And look what happened. And so I think that part of our sin nature is we want to be greater. We want to be God in some way, and something we got to fight.
That's why it's probably a non-ending sort of journey that we actually get to go on. And I think that is I think one of the things that I think that as we move forward in life, I think sometimes we look for the mountain peaks, but I think that the reality is it's the journey, it's the burning muscles as you're climbing like the mountains. And that became really clear again to just talk about like my son, you know, after, again, for those who are maybe tuning in for the first time, he was born December 12th, 2023, 16 days later, he died. And that really, like, it really contextualized and really like really neatly organized my life into, there were two like time periods: before Benny and then after Benny. And it really helped me understand that the real umami of life is not the peaks. It's actually it's in between the peaks. That's the actual real breath, because peaks are so temporary, so momentary, right? When you like, whenever you buy something new, right, you get a momentary like dopamine hit, right? And then it's over, right? Versus when you think back about like your 10-year journey, I mean, you could almost hear it, Scott, as you were talking about it. Like, the joy was not in the 10 years. The joy was in the fact of like everything that happened from the moment you made the decision to the fact that you made it 10 years.
Man, talking about Benny, I unfortunately we've had some friends that we've walked through similar situations with, and I just don't know how you go on from that. One of my childhood best friends, we were roommates our freshman year of college. A couple years ago, his 8-year-old son died of brain cancer after an 18-month battle. And I remember coming home from the funeral and just thinking, man, it is not fair. And I've got a son that was the same age, and it is not fair that I get to go home to my, at the time, 8-year-old son, and he's got to go to the cemetery to visit his. And man, I don't know how you get through that. And um, kudos to you and your wife for doing that together. And, so often that rips marriages apart, rips families apart. And so, um, praise God for getting you through that. Um, Part of what you were talking about, I've, I've, I've come to this realization talking about peaks and valleys, and the last several years have been really, really challenging. And I had a realization a couple months ago. In fact, on a physical mountaintop, I early on in starting my business, I was at a crossroads, and I went on a solo retreat just by myself for a few days to pray and read scripture and think and clear my head and try to get clarity on some things. And it's something I've needed to do and wanted to do for a very long time. And I mentioned convene. We had a convene meeting late this summer, and there's a very wise woman in our group. And she said, look, I know we're all praying, but how often are we actually taking time to get still and not talk, but just listen? And when she said that, like, that was the catalyst for me to go, okay, I've been needing to do another one of these retreats for a while, and this is it. And so a couple months ago, I flew to Colorado, rented this tiny little cabin in Estes Park right outside of Rocky Mountain National Park. And it's been, oh man, incredible. And one of the things that had hit me a while back was I had been numb for a really, really long time. And what I took away from this retreat was I went from being numb to having an incredible peace. And there was some scripture that was a big part of that, Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. And in fact, one of your guests you had on a few months ago talked about that as well, and he also called out, like, most people leave out that last part about and are called according to His purpose. And hearing that in the time that I was going through this was really powerful. And so I came away from this retreat having shifted from being numb to having peace. And the symptoms, I think, of numbness and peace are very similar, but the condition of your heart, the condition of your mind is really the differentiation. And it is a very, very fine line between the two of those things. And thankfully, I've been in this incredible period of peace for the last couple of months. And I also know that I can easily drift back over to the numb side. And so, I would encourage people, whether you're a person of faith or not, like, if you need to go and get away by yourself, be alone with your thoughts for a few days in an unfamiliar environment. And I cannot tell you how important having those times to reset is.
Yeah. Yeah. The visual I got, Scott, when I was listening to you, I had a guest on. Well, it's sometimes tough when we release and when we record, but it was a couple weeks ago. And he was talking about how you need to be a warrior in the garden, be like a gardener warrior. And that's what I think about in terms of numb is sort of being like head in the sand, and peace being you're aware, but you are just content. And I'm curious, and I don't know how you want to like talk about this in terms of like how. So I'm gonna leave this kind of chef's choice here. But you talked about like you're 9, you're conflict avoidant, you got a lot of scars. I'm really curious about that because at the end of the day, the thing that if we truly want to all like be and see each other for who we really are, is that we all have scars. So I'm really curious about how your journey is and what that led to you. And then second is this idea of needing space. I know one of the things that you and I talked about and is like this idea of creating space in the form of like sabbaticals, but I think these are both. I think these are synonymous, creating the space so you can actually have awareness of what the scars are. But so maybe, do you want to start in terms of talking a little bit about your journey as you went to being kind of really conflict avoidant? Because I think truly at the heart of it, all of us are relatively conflict avoidant, but sometimes some more than others. Can you talk through like that journey and and the importance, and then after that, the importance of creating space, like a sabbatical.
I have a strong appreciation for people who are able to take conflict head on. And there are people that I think are on the complete other end of the spectrum that actually like to stir up conflict, and the intention and the motives are not right. But I've got a number of people on my team who are really good at just not going to sweep this under the rug. We're gonna talk about this. We're gonna be direct. We're not going to mince words, and they have an incredible ability to navigate those tough conversations, and it's something that I wish that I had more of. Man, there are countless situations where I've not wanted to go and have those tough conversations, and despite mentors speaking into situations and telling me, literally one situation, I won't get too deep in the details on it, but there was a situation with a team member that I let drag on for years. And I mean, years and years and years. And I kept kicking the can, kept kicking the can, kept kicking the can. And man, the amount of heartache and angst that created for me for years was way more than I should have let myself bear. And about a year and a half ago, I'd had a meeting with this team member, and I always dreaded these meetings, and um, get almost to the very end of the meeting, and I'm like, whew, all right, that actually went okay. And at the very end, like, they just dropped this bomb. And for a month, I was just wrecked. And we had some stuff going on, some family stuff, outside of our core family of five. And so all this stuff was compounding at the same time. And a few weeks after this conversation with this team member, I'd gone to DC for some client and partner meetings, and couldn't fall asleep. Eventually did. And then I woke up at like 4 a.m. And after tossing and turning for another 30 minutes, I'm like, I'm not going back to sleep. And I hopped on a scooter and rode down to Lincoln Memorial, and I watched the sunrise from Lincoln. Highly recommend that, by the way. It's incredible seeing the sun come up over the mall and the reflecting pool. And I get back from that trip, and at 6 a.m., I literally shot out of bed on Saturday morning, and I'd just been all twisted up inside. And I've never audibly heard the voice of God, but there are a number of times where I feel that the Holy Spirit has spoken very, very clearly to my heart. And what I heard when I shot up in bed at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning was, Scott, you are avoiding this situation because you're afraid that this person might leave. And if they leave, you're afraid of what that might do to the business. If you don't act, you are deliberately choosing to have this constant internal consternation. You need to act, and damn the consequences. And it was so powerful. And so it took a week or two to have the meeting with this person. And when I finally just had the conversation, I knew that the likelihood of them leaving was very high, and ultimately they did. But I can't tell you how much peace it finally brought to me to have closure on that situation. And so, for other people who are conflict avoidant like me, it does not get better by kicking the can. It will only get better if you address it. And you've got to pick your moment. You've got to choose your words carefully. But if you don't act on those hard conversations that you know you need to have, you're only making life worse for yourself and potentially for the other person.
You'd asked before, like, hey, how do you like get through that? And I had this, and what you just said now, I think is like really important, is that I'm just going to go anchor it back to the conversation around Benny. I remember a friend, and I've said maybe a couple times on the podcast, that he had sent me this text. He said, God must really respect you. I remember being like, at the time being like, well, I've never heard anyone say that. Growing up around, my dad was a pastor, been around funerals, death a lot, but I was like, I've never heard anyone say that. And it didn't hit me until later, when it was actually this last year in February, when I was down in Phoenix at an entrepreneurial gathering. I was telling someone about like Benny and just how all these things, and the fact that he even lived 16 days is that he had, and making it through some of these testing that we went through, that he was a false negative on. And I said, it's like 0.00000. I was like, take 20 zeros after the decimal point and one. I said, it's basically the same odds of winning a Powerball. And that's when it like hit me, is that these things that happen, that like Benny was my Powerball. Like I've been looking, going like, oh, Powerball means you're going to go get some like, no, Powerball is like being present. It's like a raffle ticket that God gives us every single day. And at the bottom of the raffle ticket says, must be present to win. And I think about like these situations, like peace. When you think about, why do people want more money? Because they think it's going to buy them what? It's going to buy them safety, security, so that at the end of the day, we're all driving towards this one thing, right? Like this idea of, I'm going to be at peace, right? Because when you're at peace, it means you're being present. Maybe. I mean, there's a whole different areas you could take this, but I just was thinking about, when I was listening to your story, Scott, was these are all these mini raffles that I feel like God is putting in front of us. And we just have to be present to play. Like, we have to be present to win. And that's what you did. And when you did it, you found this peace. You went to a mountaintop and you faced this internal conversation head on, and you found like peace. I don't know. Like, I feel like you're onto something here. We're all looking for this more, when it's actually, maybe we should actually be like going less of that and a lot more of this internal, like Powerball playing. I don't know.
I love that. And, for me, when I think about money and I think about wealth, um, more important than it buying you things, it frees your time. And ultimately, as I think about my desire to create wealth for myself and my family, what I ultimately want is more freedom over my time. And yeah, with that might come, vacations and toys and all that kind of stuff. But for me, the ultimate freedom would be to have complete autonomy over my time. And kind of tying back to the earlier conversation we had about, you know, people approaching me and saying, "Hey, would you want to roll into what we're doing?" And, there was that identity thing. But I think another part of that, and actually this kind of ties into the Enneagram 9, is one of my greatest desires is to have full autonomy over my time, and to not have I hate to say burden, because that's not the right word, but for lack of a better word, the burden of having a, job I get to go to every day. Man, what would life look like if I just had full autonomy over my time? And what could I do with that? And so ultimately that's where money lands for me, is that it's a vehicle that buys you time. Our time is finite. Benny had 16 days, and my wife's father was killed by a drunk driver on his way to work one morning when she was young, and we don't know when our last day is going to be. My oldest is a sophomore in high school right now, and it is becoming very, very real that we've got 2.5 more years with him in our home. And man, I would love to have far more autonomy over our time, and want to make the most of the next 2.5 years that we have with him at home. And so, yeah, ultimately for me, that's money buys you time.
Yeah. Let's talk about time and kind of finalize out like this sort of like conflict avoidance. But I was talking about like getting time away, like that time, even it's not like it's a sabbatical, right? Maybe it's like a micro sabbatical, right? You go away to Colorado, you go to, Washington, D.C., see sunrises or sunsets like on the, the pool. Talk a little bit about what you have found, because I think that oftentimes people think to get more, you need to do more. But it's actually, I think, what you just were talking about. To actually get more, to be more, to feel more, to think more, you actually need less. And that can you talk about like that forced separation that a sabbatical, at least what you found?
Yeah. And so I talked about these little solo retreats that I've gone on, but also about 2.5 years ago, well, I'll go even further back than that. I love talking with other entrepreneurs, and I learn so much, and hopefully have helped other people learn and grow. But probably 4 or 5 years ago, I was talking with somebody in our space, very similar business, similar size, do similar things. And he told me about a book that he had read called Clockwork. And Clockwork, very similar to EOS, very similar to Scaling Up and some of these others. And in this book, he basically lays out a challenge to the owner, founder, and says, look, go put these things into practice and plant a flag and pick a date in the future and take a month away from your business. Not take a week here and a couple days there, and over the course of a year, you've taken a month off. No, from the 1st to 31st, take a month off. And the reason for that is over the course of a month, most businesses are going to do everything in the business cycle that's going to happen. You're going to run payroll, you're going to bill, you're going to have payables, you're going to, it's a full financial period, right? And so put these things into practice, take a full month off. And when you come back, if your business is as good or better than when you left it, you have a quote unquote clockwork business. And so he's telling me this, and right around that time, we were actually about to start rolling out EOS internally. And once we committed to going that route, started that in late 2021. And in January 2022, I told our leadership team, hey, we're going to spend the next year and a half creating clarity, accountability, making sure processes are documented, figuring out where Scott is a bottleneck. And I am going to take a full month off in July of 20, I think it was July of 23. And it actually ended up being a 5-week sabbatical, just the way things worked out for our family. And going back to that control, delegation, abdication, if you had told my early team members that, hey, someday in the future, Scott's going to take 5 weeks off of the business, they would have said, you are crazy. Who is this Scott you're talking about? Because it's not the Scott that I know. And man, again, like it's not the sort of thing that you can just decide today and leave tomorrow. You've got to put the systems in place. You've got to create that clarity and accountability and structure. But man, we did it. And when I came back on my first day back in the office, everything was certainly as good. And we had a debrief meeting. And let me back up. When I say I took a sabbatical, I got in my truck in the parking lot at the office on May 31st, and I literally deleted Slack and deleted my email off my phone. My out of office message said, I'm gone from here to here. For this, contact this person. For this, contact that person. And if you really need me, create a reminder to follow up after this day, because when I get back, I'm not going to read 8,000 emails. I'm literally going to just purge everything in my inbox, and it's going to get lost. So if you really need me, check back after this day. So I truly, I did not exist. And so, when I get back, the team had prepared this debrief, and it was so well thought out, so well documented. Like, here were the big decisions that we made. Here were the decisions that we felt like we needed to defer. Here were some of the minor little things that came up, and here you go. And man, it was incredible. And it was incredible for me, and I'll talk more about that in a second. It was incredible for me, but it was also, I think, incredibly empowering for our team. And it's a huge sign of trust when you tell your leadership team, hey, look, I'm trusting you with the ship while I'm away. And we've worked together. You understand our values as an organization. You understand how I think through these things. And I trust you to operate this well while I'm gone. For me personally, we we spent our first 10 days in Wyoming, and we went to Yellowstone and Grand Tetons and Jackson Hole, and it was absolutely incredible. And when I got back, my wife and I had this kind of tradition where in the afternoons, like 3 o'clock, we'd go make margaritas and sit by the pool and just have this incredible, wonderful time. The two of us just getting, good dedicated time together. And like, I don't know, 2 weeks in, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I was just on a week-long vacation right now, I would be thinking about, okay, I gotta start getting back into work mode. But I've got 3 more weeks, and this is incredible. And I got good time with family. One of the things that I'd planned on doing during this retreat was, there's this idea of working on the business and not working in the business. And I had this plan that there's a coffee shop that's my happy place that I go to when I got to get heads down. And I thought, a couple times a week, I'm going to go to this coffee shop, and I'm not going to work in the business. I'm not going to get my email, but I'm like going to spend some time actually thinking through things. And every time I was planning on going to the coffee shop, I felt this tug of like, no, I need to be with my family. I need to go drive kids all over town. I need to go do this and that. And I felt this weird tug. There was this weird sense of guilt of, I didn't commit to my team that I was going to be doing this, but I felt like if I didn't do that, I might be letting them down when I came back. And I realized, no, I need to have my focus on my family while I have this space. And man, when I came back after 5 weeks, I had a whole fresh set of eyes for the business and some of my emotional attachment to certain things. And I don't think I'm alone in having an emotional attachment to things in the business. My emotional attachment was not as strong. And I was able to be far more objective about how I looked at things. And over time, that stuff creeps back in. But it was so impactful for so many reasons, for me, for my team, for the organization at large. And I would encourage any business owner, plant the flag, put the systems in place, create the clarity, create the accountability, and trust your team to fly.
Yeah. Can you talk about, because you also have a team at home, right? You talked about like, hey, if you're going to go into the entrepreneurial space, you got to make sure like your partner understands fully like what's being signed up and they're supportive. How impactful was that to your family team?
It was huge. And, we talked earlier about balance and how you never fully achieve balance. And for the last, really, since I came back from this retreat a couple months ago, my work has been a lot more intense than it has been for a while. And you're going to go through these seasons. There's going to be these ebbs and flows. And I had a period where, I traveled probably 3 out of 4 weeks. And then, when I got back, just had a lot of other work related commitments, and it was early mornings and late evenings with dinners and different events that I was going to here locally. And a week or two ago, I called my wife on my way home, and she said, our youngest, his name is Knox. Knox is so excited for you to get home. And he told one of his friends at school today, I'm so excited because I get to see my dad today. And man, that just broke my heart, because I'm like, bud, I'm not an absent father. Like I'm here. And yeah, we're in a season right now that I'm having to work a lot more than I normally do, but like, this isn't normal. This isn't what life is always like. And all things considered, like this is a blip. But man, he didn't see that. And it was encouraging, but it was also heartbreaking. It was encouraging that, man, my son loves me so much and he craves that time with his dad. And on the flip side, we've enjoyed many, many seasons where I'm home sometimes before 5. And so anyway, I treasure my time with my family, and it's good to know that they miss me too.
Yeah, I want to tackle that one head on because I think this is something that all people, not just entrepreneurs, but anyone who has shows up, has a really awesome brain between their ears, right? And has a desire to create impact, to serve, right? To do big shit. How do you, because this idea of balance, number one, I sometimes wonder if that's an ideal that, like in Dan terms, puts you in the gap, right? Was this the right balance? But when you have something like that, your son says, I can't wait. I mean, do you think that that's like he has the wherewithal going, I don't see my dad, or is he just so, it's one of the beauties about being a kid, right? The reason why you had so much joy because you were just so present. There wasn't a whole lot of past, not a lot of future. It's just like right now. Like I want to play right now. And so how much of that is our narrative that we're putting into that? How much of that do you feel like it's because he's noticing like that you are working a lot? And how much of it is like we just, there's just decisions you make. If there's a season of life right now that the business is busy, that's just, we have to say yes to that, and we're saying no to that. Can you walk through, like, when you think about in this real situation for yourself, and how you not only you've seen yourself but others, like what's reality, what's narrative, and what's just as fact?
I don't know that any one of those lanes is always true. And like I said earlier, there's seasons. And one of the things that I do think is critical is that you establish boundaries early. And going back to the early days of the business, one of my one of my challenges, and I've done a lot better with this over more recent years, but I have a hard time turning work off up here. And as a quick aside to that story, I've worked from home off and on throughout my career. And my first job where I worked 100% out of the house, I remember thinking, I never want to go back into an office ever again. And at the time, we just had one kid, and then as we had more kids and they got older, it got harder and harder to work from home. And for the first couple of years of starting my company, I worked out of the house as a one man shop. And when I hired my first employee, we got our first office, and I still remember driving home that first day and just having this audible. And for me, I have such a hard time turning work off in my mind, and having a physical separation between work and home was so valuable. I was able to be much more focused at work and much more focused at home. And so, kind of going back to these boundaries, one of the things, knowing what I know about myself and that I have a hard time turning work off, I had a realization a couple years in the business that at least twice a year, I need to take a full week off. I'd love to take a full month off every year, but I need to take a full week off, and I need to delete my email, delete Slack, because if curiosity gets the best of me, and it takes me 3 to 4 days after I leave the office for my mind to fully like get out of the work mode. And if on Tuesday or Wednesday of that week of vacation, if I go look at my email and there's just one little ember, not even a fire, but like a little ember, man, it takes me 3 or 4 more days to shut that back down. Exactly. And so I come back, and yeah, I took a week off, but I don't come back rested. And so the way that I'm wired, I have to fully detach. And so I got in a healthy routine early on where at least twice a year I would take a full week off, and I would fully take that off. And going back to this idea of the golden rule and creating the kind of company I want to work for, when we have our company wide meetings, I'll start a phrase and the whole company can finish it. And it's, when you take PTO, take PTO. Don't do this half working, half, vacation. Like, I want you to leave. I want you to detach. I want you to come back refreshed. And so that's one thing. And then another thing, you talked about this idea of being present. I'm not a big New Year's resolution person. I'm not very good at sticking to them. And probably 2018 or 2019, going into the year, I was like, you know what? I am going to set a resolution this year. And my resolution is to be more present. And so one of the things that I did that helped, I turned off notifications on my phone for email and for Slack. And so that one little thing was huge. So instead of sitting at the dinner table and getting ping, 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 and throughout the evening, I would have to intentionally go and look, and just getting that, it's there, but it's not flying in my face. And that one small thing made a meaningful impact on helping me be more present. And I do think, I think that my team probably does get frustrated at me, because taking that idea of being present, it's not just being present at home, but it's being present at work. And, I spend so much of my day in meetings, and I'm getting pinged in Slack all day. I'm getting blown up on email. And I really try not to look at those things while I'm in the meeting, because I want to be present with the people that are giving me their time. And so, it creates a backlog, and I'll get to, the end of a string of meetings, and I've got 40 Slack messages and 30 emails, and I got to go play catch up, and it's holding people up. But at the same time, like, I think it's more valuable to be present with the people that are promising me their time.
Yeah. Yeah. Which just kind of builds us into this idea of like culture. I mean, you talked earlier that like your parents, like a lot of parents treat others as you want to be treated. Um, and like creating the company, what would be the company that I would want to like work for myself? Can you talk a little bit about culture and the importance of it? Because I think sometimes people, it's like the lipstick, we're going to talk about culture, but then like, that's how I feel like a lot of companies are. And then there's companies who go, no, culture is part of our process. Culture is part of our DNA. Culture is, in essence, the bedrock that we do everything off of.
What you said about culture is the DNA. That I don't think I could have said it better myself. And jumping around for a second, I had this realization a while back that brand is the outward expression of a company's internal culture. And going back to the 10x 2x book, one of my biggest takeaways was, number one, as an organization, we've really got to throw off our distractions, and we've got to do the who, not how. And I've got to really tap into what are my superpowers. And the three things that I was able to kind of distill down to what are my superpowers are partnerships, culture, and brand. And again, brand and culture are two very, very tightly interwoven things. We have 6 core values, and I won't go through all of them, but our number one, if we were to order the importance of our 6 core values, our number one core value is one team. And over the years, I've seen a lot of professional services organizations, and it's not just professional services. I think you see this throughout a lot of industries. People have to step on other people to get ahead in their career. And I've just never understood that. Like, it just seems so unhealthy. And so when we talk about one team, it means we're going to win together, we're going to lose together, but either way, we're doing it together, and we're not pointing fingers and, well, it's your fault, you screwed up. No, that does not exist here. And taking that further, like, listen, we're a small company. We're 25, 30 people. And that means we got to wear a lot of hats. And sometimes you have to wear a hat for a little bit that you may not want to, but it's part of this one team thing. I'll tell you a quick story. One of my team members, his name is Chad Nelson, and that's important for a reason you'll see here in a second. We bought our office building a few years ago, and we had a big open house and had like over 200 people showed up, which was mind blowing. And I'm running around like checking things out, making sure things are all in order. And Chad, who is one of our directors, is on our leadership team. I see Chad walk around the corner with a toilet brush. I said, Chad, what are you doing with a toilet brush? He says, well, Scott, I went in the men's room, and we've got all these guests coming, and the men's room isn't in the kind of condition that we would want to present to our guests. I'm going to go scrub the toilet. And Chad's a former football player, big dude. And I grabbed the toilet brush and said, Chad, you're a director here, man. Like, no, you're not scrubbing the toilet. This is my building. Like, I will go and scrub the toilet. And being the gentle giant he is, he nicely brushes me off, takes that toilet brush back in his hand, and he goes, "No, I'm going to do this." And so once a quarter, we give out the Chad Nelson One Team Award, and the trophy that you get to have at your desk for the quarter is literally a golden toilet brush. We built this toilet brush trophy, spray painted gold, and it is the highest honor that you can receive here at Venn. And that one team idea, this thought of, well, that's not my job. Like, that doesn't exist here. Like, if you're going to be successful here, like, you got to be that one team willing to scrub a toilet if that's what needs to be done. And thankfully, we've brought in, for the most part, people that are fully bought into that.
What causes someone to buy into it or not to buy into it? Right? I mean, because if someone doesn't buy into it, does that mean they're not culture, or is there like, this isn't my flavor?
We're not batting 1,000 on this, but for the most part, somebody, this group that we used to work with, they were talking about their growth, and they were talking about their desire and their hiring, knowing that they were gearing up for rapid growth, was that a candidate was sold on the company before they actually sat in their first interview. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, I love that. And so we've actually taken a lot of time and created a lot of content around what is it like to work here. And we've done a lot of marketing really specifically for recruiting and conveying the culture. And that idea of, before somebody comes and sits in that interview chair for the first time, I want this person sold on our company. And if they've got, offer A and offer B, I want them to have already decided that, all things being equal, that they're going to take ours. And so I think our process and our hiring process is also fairly lengthy, and you're going to talk to a whole bunch of people, and depending on the role we're hiring you for, you may actually have to put time in on your own to complete an assignment. And so I think that our process really helps us figure out pretty early on, is this someone who's looking for a job, or are they looking for the job where this is where they want to be? And, occasionally somebody isn't fully bought in, and that shows. And one of the things that we do as part of our quarterly pulse with our leadership team is we run through this thing called the People Analyzer, which is an EOS concept. And we grade everybody on how well do they align with our core values. And then part of that is also what EOS calls GWC, get it, want it, and has capacity to do it. And so, every quarter we're going through and grading, and it's like, hey, I feel like this person's fallen off a little bit here. Okay, well, what do we need to do to get that back on track? And so, and that kind of goes back to that balance thing, right? Like, just because last quarter was great doesn't mean that the next quarter is going to be. And so, you got to constantly measure and tweak where you need to.
You and I in the green room were talking a little bit about AI, and I think that AI and culture are, I can't tell if they're bedfellows yet, or they're competing, or if it's a culture is the competitive advantage as we move forward here. I'm curious from your perspective, Scott. As you look at your own company, you look at the companies that you're going into and helping build these millions of dollars of like recurring revenue through efficiencies, right? How do you see AI playing out in the world that we're in? And also, I think also going back to this idea of culture, because I think, so just high level, I think the more the AI is coming in, the more I think that I literally look at and double down, triple down, quadruple down on my culture, because I think it's the beingness. And because what you said before, the brand is the external representation of your internal well-being. But I'm curious, because you have a lot of experience with the AI, obviously, as you're going into companies and system structures, processes.
So I said this earlier, but I am constantly vacillating between being bullish and bearish on AI. And I've had some things I've done with AI that I've been just absolutely blown away by. And I've had other things that I'm like, well, that was an utter failure. One of my coolest, like, wow moments with AI, this was like 2 years ago. My daughter is studying for her math final, And I haven't done middle school math in a long, long time. And I read the question and she's like, Dad, I think that the answer key for the study guide is wrong. I think the answer is B. And I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I think you're right. Um, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to check this out. So I get up my phone, I take a picture of the question, I load it into ChatGPT. And first off, like the way the image was oriented, it was sideways and it reoriented and immediately the correct answer is B. And here's why, and it explains it all. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Other times I thought I'd been very clear on what I was asking it for. And it just couldn't get it right. I was having it review a legal document and I'm telling it, I am this party, they are that party. And it couldn't get it right. Other things I've asked it for, like it's just been factually incorrect. And so, you know, AI is here to stay and we're going to have to figure out how to work with it. But today it is not the panacea that it is, you know, claimed to be.
I think one of the things you said when you were talking about AI was that it's a lot of what people get confused about is that efficiency doesn't necessarily happen through AI. It actually happens through automation. And there's a big difference between those two. Can you talk about the difference between those two? And then I want to circle this back to like culture.
So much of things being promoted as AI are just hype. And that comes out in a lot of different ways. And as a quick note on this, for companies that are looking at new tools and they're wanting to talk to the publisher about, you know, tell me about your AI in this, you have to take a very discerning look and ascertain what is real and what is hype. And so much of quote unquote AI is hype and so much of the results just aren't there. In fact, there's been some studies published on the hundreds of billions of dollars that companies have invested in AI programs for their organizations. And I'm not talking about the open AIs and the perplexities of the world. I'm talking about companies that have invested in those tools to go, you know, create efficiencies in their organizations. And with these hundreds of billions of dollars that have been spent, only something like 5% of organizations have actually been able to point to a positive ROI. And so I do think that we will see gains over time, but I think that we're still figuring this out. And so many of these companies that are putting tools out there, they're not able to actually deliver on what they claim to deliver. I was talking with somebody recently who looked at this AI first accounting product and they got a demo from the founder. And first off, their take on the accounting system was, this is a middle of the road accounting system. Like there's nothing really special about it. It has this little co-pilot that lives inside the screen where you can ask it questions, but that's about the extent of it. And he said, okay, founder, while you're doing this demo, I want you to have it pull up the, all of our customers with their revenue for the last 6 months. And he goes and puts in the prompt, and it spits out like 5 or 10 customers. It's like, well, wait, no, there's more than that in the system. And the guy's like, oh yeah, you're right. Let me run this again. And try again, could not get the AI to actually return the full revenue by customer list that they were trying to get to. So be very, very discerning as you're making AI investment decisions. I do think these things are going to get better over time, but the world that we're in today, it's just not there. The other thing is, so many of these companies that are hyping up AI, they've been around for a long, long time. I'll pick on one product category, and that's these like chat support agents that are on people's websites. So now these companies are quote unquote AI companies, these companies that have been around for a decade. Are you really telling me that there's something fundamentally different in your product today? The results are the same. Maybe there is some LLM on the background that's doing some generative work, but 10 years ago, before AI was a thing, I could go out to your website, I could put in a question. It's going to take the context of that question. It's going to look in a database and it's going to surface an answer that potentially solves my question. your product is not fundamentally different today than it was, but you put AI on a slide deck and now all of a sudden your company's worth 10 times more than it was before you put those two letters on your deck. So so much of quote unquote AI is really just automation. So again, we've got to take this discerning eye. And again, I'll couple other stories here. I talked with somebody recently who they're actually a competitor, but we've got a really great relationship. And he says to me, "Man, I'm really worried. A couple weeks ago, I lost my first deal to AI." I was like, "Well, tell me more about this deal." And he's explaining, and I'm like, he gets to the end, and I said, "Look, clearly the value wasn't there. Like their problem wasn't a problem that was worth the price of what you're doing. Like this is kind of a niche thing." But also, like, you're worried that you're going to have this come up over and over and over again where somebody's going to go spin up an AI tool and it's going to do this thing that your product does. Look, the number of companies that have someone internally that can actually go and build something like this, they're very, very few. And over time, might there be more? Yeah, sure. But also there's this idea that some prominent people are putting out there that SaaS is dead and that companies like Salesforce and HubSpot that have, these well-entrenched customer bases for CRM, that they're going to suddenly disappear because companies are going to go spin up Replit or Lovable and they're going to go build their own CRM. And where I think that may be true is for things that are ancillary to these core systems. Yeah, you might go spin up some of these custom apps to do these like point solutions that have a very narrow use case and focus. But let's talk about hiring people. You're going to go hire a seasoned salesperson, and let's talk about the recruiting. You're talking to them in their interview, and they're going to ask, hey, what systems are you using? Hey, we've got this really awesome AI built custom CRM, and it is the greatest thing. Trust us. Well, let's say that person does choose to take the job. You've now got this additional learning curve that they're going to have to go through, and you're going to have this thing that you've got to maintain. And so I don't see that working out very well in the long run. But let's rewind that process a little bit. And let's talk about the seasoned salesperson that's had 10, 15 years of success using a product like Salesforce. And by the way, we work with Salesforce. I've been in that world for a long time. It has plenty of frustrations, but at the same time, if you're a proven salesperson and you have these tools that you have been successful with, are you going to actually want to take a risk on this system that you don't have any exposure to, you don't have any experience with, and in sales where so much of your compensation is derived from what you actually sell? Are you going to take the risk and trust that this can support you in a way to get you to your financial goals? So I don't think that we're anywhere near AI replacing a lot of these core applications out there. That being said, like there have been some things that we've done that have been incredible. I had a realization. We have a former employee who still does some contract work for us. And about 6 months ago, I was in a Slack channel and I realized they were still in this channel. And it wasn't anything that they wasn't confidential or anything like that. But I was like, you know what? They just don't need to be in here. Then it dawned on me, they were with us for a long time. How many other channels are they still in? And I went out to this tool called Replit, and I kid you not, in 20 minutes, just through prompting, I built this app that looked at our Slack system, and I could go select a user and it would tell me, here's all the channels they're in. And I was able to click a button, remove. And so that was great. Now, that was this very specific, very narrow use case. And really, that was just kind of a one-time thing. And it would have taken me half a day or longer to go through and find that manually. But I was able to spin up a tool really quickly and easily to do this one very, very narrow thing. So bullish, bearish, varies day by day. I spend a lot of time like learning and focusing and trying new things with it to see if it can make a meaningful impact on our business. And generally speaking, it's not there yet. But going to the culture thing, I was talking with a good friend of mine a week or two ago, and he's a speaker and an author. And as an aside, I think he'd be a great guest. I'd love to make an intro at some point. And he's working on a book right now, and the central idea in this book is around friction. And he the general premise is that for years we have been working to remove friction from our organizations, and some amount of that is good and healthy, but at the same time, maybe some of that friction kind of creates some glue that keeps us together. And relationships are built through friction. I think about, you know, long time relationships. Like there's been periods of friction in those relationships, but you work through that friction and you come out stronger. And now let's throw in this world of AI, and how much more friction is that going to potentially take out of organizations? And at what point does that actually become unhealthy? Because we need to have tough conversations. We need to fight through difficult situations together. And so it'll be a year or more before the book comes out, and I can't wait to read it. But AI can't replace human connection. There was a story earlier this year about a man that proposed marriage to his AI assistant. I'm like, what? Like, what dystopian world are we in? Like, this is tragic. And so we're we're gonna have to take the good with the bad. And I was having a separate conversation with a couple of other buddies that are business owners last week, and we were talking a lot about AI. And one of them made a comment that the advent of social media and a lot of the technology that we have today is a net negative. And he was able to really back up what he was saying about it. And I'm like, I think you're right on a lot of this, but at the same time, it's a tool. And firearms can be used for good, they can be used for evil. Um, and the firearm itself is not inherently bad. It's how it gets used. And we were talking on a Zoom, and one of my buddies was here locally, another buddy's in another part of Texas. I'm like, because of this technology and technology that you and I are using right now, you're in Wisconsin, I'm in Dallas, and we're able to have this conversation. So these things are not inherently bad. It's how do you choose to employ the tool? And if AI becomes a replacement for relationship, yeah, that's a problem. That's a bad use of the tool. But the tool in of itself is not inherently bad.
Yeah, it's almost like you can utilize it to maybe get like a deeper sort of uh, understanding so that you can actually maybe like, hey, what are some questions that I could ask that would be meaningful, that would drive deeper connection? Like I had a conversation where I was thinking about like, one of my lifetime extender goals is to have a epic love affair with my wife. And so I was like having this conversation, and I'm like, what are the questions that you would ask me to go like, where's my knowledge level? And I want you to rank me on a scale of like 1 to 10 based off of like, and I gave it like 3 or 4 like big names in like the relationship like world. And I found that now if I said, hey, I want you to just tell me in terms of what are the top 10 best dates I could do with Jenna, that probably would have massively failed. But instead it said, hey, here are some gaps. And if you actually could find out this information based off of these authors, like this would probably expand your opportunity for you to be able to like keep moving on your journey towards that goal. So I appreciate the fact that like that you gave some like broad spectrum of again going being bullish and bearish.
As an aside, talking about wanting to have that lifelong love affair with your wife, book I read a couple of years ago, highly recommend. It's called Cherish. And if you haven't read it, go pick it up. Phenomenal book. In fact, it's one I need to pick up and read again.
Well, Scott, one of the things that I'm guessing people are going to want to know a little bit more, from a professional standpoint, hey, how do they find you? But like personally, in terms of like, where can they find you? Social media, LinkedIn. I mean, you talked a little bit about your podcast. Can you kind of share with the audience like where they can find you?
Yeah. So company is Venn Technology, VENN, like a Venn diagram, venntechnology.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. That being said, I have this love-hate relationship with LinkedIn, and these days it has become more hate than love because my connection requests and my inbox in LinkedIn have become just another spam folder of people wanting to sell stuff. So if you reach out on LinkedIn, mention the podcast, and I'll actually accept the invite. I mentioned the podcast. So there's a long story behind starting the podcast, and I won't go into that right now. But podcast is called In the Thick of It, and maybe just a quick little story behind it. We multiple people over the course of several years had told me, Scott, you need to start a podcast. And I fought it. And then I read a book by a guy named Dave Gerhardt called Founder Brand. And after I read the book, my marketing director had given it to me, and I said, all right, Mel, fine. I'll start this stupid podcast. And I went into it very begrudgingly. And man, it became one of my greatest passions and sources of joy. I love talking with other entrepreneurs. And so the mission behind our podcast is called In the Thick of It. And maybe a quick story behind that. So I love the podcast, How I Built This. And I've listened to tons and tons of episodes, and I've learned so much. I've had great inspiration. And one of the things that always struck me was I'd get to the end of the episode and think, wow, this person is telling their story from the mountaintop. We talked about mountaintops earlier. They sold their company, they went public, they're telling the story, looking back, and they're a lot of times they're kind of at the end of whatever that story was. And after listening to all these episodes, I thought, you know what, this is awesome. And I'm going to continue to listen, but I want to hear from the guy like me. I want to hear from the person that is running the 5, 15, 50 person firm that is still managing cash flow and still actually like living this life. And so that's why ours is called In the Thick of It. And our mission is to inspire and encourage current and future entrepreneurs. And we do that by bringing on people who are still living the day to day and telling the stories of their trials and their triumphs. And my hope is that we can help other aspiring entrepreneurs learn from our mistakes so that they don't have to make those. They're going to make their own, but learn from the successes and failures that we've had to hopefully, navigate your journey better. So check out In the Thick of It. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts.
I love it. Well, Scott, I've loved having you on. This has been an amazing conversation. And much to your chagrin, you've dropped a lot of nuggets here today for everyone, including myself and the audience, for us to kind of ponder. And as you said, you've listened to a bunch of my podcasts, and I like to end this with the guests having the last thought, the last ripple, the last question, phrase. What do you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I've actually been thinking a lot about this and have had a lot of ideas kind of run through my head. And I think just kind of the recency of things that I've been through, going back to this idea of peace and numbness. If you're a person of faith, this verse that I referenced earlier, Romans 8:28, in all things, God is working for your good. And whether you're going through a troubling time or whether you're on the mountaintop, that is being used for your good. And you may not see that right away. And you may not even see that on this side of eternity. but know that regardless of the outcome, he is working all things for your good.
I love it. Scott, thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing so generously today.
Thank you for listening. A big thanks to Elation Lab for the production and creative design. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Keep listening for more Max Life.